You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast with Tom Eston and Scott Wright, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology.
Hosted by Scott Wright, the Streetwise security coach, and Tom Eston, penetration tester and ethical hacker. And sponsored by Security Perspectives, your source for tailored security awareness training and assessment solutions. We bring you stories, advice, and tips to help you make better risk decisions because nobody else can make them for you.
Episode 47. Is it really Angelina Jolie that you're following? If it's not, you might be getting scammed.
Hello and welcome to the Shared Security Podcast. This is episode 47 for October 28th, 2015. I'm Scott Wright and I'm here with Tom Eston. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Not too bad. It's been a busy fall, but I think that's good from many points of view.
Yeah, it's all good except if you have to rake leaves, right?
Yeah, so we do. We have tiny little leaves, which is kind of nice because they blow across the lawn onto the neighbor's lawn, and I run over them with the lawnmower once, and that's pretty much it.
Those Canadian leaves.
Yeah, fortunately, we don't actually have maple trees in our yard, so they would be huge, big leaves that are hard to rake. But that's another day.
Nice.
So, anything new and exciting happening with you these days, Tom?
No, the only thing that's going on, I know this week, I'll be speaking at the Cleveland Information Security Summit tomorrow, so I'll be there. That's a good local conference that it's a 2-day event. Usually attracts about 500 people, all security professionals around the Cleveland area. Mm-hmm. So looking forward to that and connecting with my peers.
Yeah, so someday I'm going to have to get down there. I always say that, right? For one of
you do every year, I think.
Yeah. Actually, Cleveland would be a lot easier for me to get to than Vegas, probably, but we'll have to see.
It would, yeah.
So, yeah, I don't have any big events coming up. In fact, I've kind of had to decline in the next month or two some things because just so busy. I'm doing lots of computer-based training projects now for different clients in security awareness mostly. So it's keeping me busy. But there are things happening out in the real world, aren't there?
There's a lot going on. It's almost hard to keep up with.
Yeah, so why don't we do a quick run through of some of the topics we're going to cover today?
Sure. Yeah, so we're going to start with maybe a little bit of a fun topic about celebrity impersonations on the internet. So people that impersonate celebrities and maybe what the security risk is of that kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about people following other people. You know, are they really following the person they think they're following? In some cases, I guess the attackers are hoping they're able to trick people into getting them. We'll talk about what that means, what the risks are a little bit.
Yep.
Good
old social engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're going to talk about a more serious topic, I think, in the area of our kids.
Yeah, this is a really good article that was on LinkedIn that we're going to highlight. Just talking about, beyond social media, right? I think it's just the new technology that kids are using today and what parents can do to kind of keep up with their kids and really educate their kids on some of the risks and some of the dangers that are out there with all this new tech.
Yeah, and maybe some ideas that parents may not have thought of yet for us to discuss. So I think that'll be an interesting part of the show.
Yeah, really good stuff there. And then we want to kind of talk about some of the changes that have happened in Europe regarding the safe harbor data laws. It can have a big impact, I think, to the services that we use. And we'll talk about what that means and how that relates to you and your business.
Yeah, both business and personal, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So we'll also talk about, of course, the Internet of Things, one of our favorite topics when it comes to risks that people should be thinking about. And turns out, I guess people aren't thinking much about them yet.
No, it's kind of a big gadget craze right now, and we'll talk about, from the consumer perspective, why people are buying all these different things,
Hmm.
right? And then the IT and the security side of that, and they have a little bit different take on all this new
Yeah, I
stuff.
mean, many of us in security world kind of assume people understand the risks, but we're gonna dig a little deeper and hope people can spend some
Hmm.
time thinking about them.
Yep, and I think we'll finish up talking about some two recent hacks or research, I'll say, in one in particular about how hackers can control your Siri or your Google Voice on your phone remotely, potentially, and a new way of conducting phishing and social engineering to bypass two-factor authentication, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so these are both areas I think people will take an interest in because they could potentially find themselves in a situation that involves this stuff. So good things to talk about. So let's go back and look at the blog entry from Zero Fox regarding celebrity impersonations. What did they talk about?
Yeah, so Zero Fox, which we've mentioned on the podcast before, they've done some really interesting research around which celebrities have the most impersonators. And I kind of found it fascinating, and I think you did too, Scott, kind of digging through the data that
Yep.
they put together. And based on, I think, the different types of services, obviously Facebook and Twitter being the two biggest services that we see celebrity impersonators. But we see LinkedIn as kind of being that outlier that, not a lot of attackers are utilizing that. There may be a few reasons for that.
Yeah, I was just sort of speculating a little bit to think, well, maybe either attackers just aren't interested in LinkedIn, they're not excited about it, or it could be that they're going where the money is, which is more likely, and that is that businesses actually probably do more of their marketing and communicating with their clients and followers on the more popular social networks for personal use, like Facebook and
Hmm.
Twitter. So I think that makes sense to some extent, but it does sort of jump out at you that LinkedIn is not very high on their list of number of celebrities impersonated.
Yeah, it reminds me of research that myself and Kevin Johnson did many years ago. I mean, not many years ago, but back in like 2009, we actually did a talk at ShmooCon, the ShmooCon Hacker Conference, where I created a Twitter bot impersonating Jessica Biel and Rick Astley. Um, and so maybe we'll link the video of that talk in the show notes. But people have been doing this for years, and the reason I did the research back in 2009, this is right when Twitter and social media was really starting to get moving, and it was really to spread awareness of not everybody you speak to or everybody that you interact with is a real human being, right? Or actually the person you think they are through their online
Yeah.
account. And this new research kind of shows that this is continuing. Most of these celebrity impersonators are also bots.
Yep.
They're not human. They have some automation built into them, and I think it's just a fascinating look at. And it really, if you read the article, I think you'll understand, from an awareness perspective that, this stuff is out there
Yeah.
and it's definitely
Yeah,
getting
and just
worse.
a couple of things I thought we might talk about. Number one is how do you know whether you're following the right person or not? And I think on Twitter, I use the little verified
Yep.
checkbox or check mark beside their name, which usually means they've been somehow vetted, and you can probably rely on them. But in Facebook, I'm not sure. Is there any way of getting verification of who it is?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, Facebook has the same similar feature. You'll see, by celebrities and others that are actually posting things on Facebook, you'll see a little checkbox, a verified checkbox next to their name, and they do the same
Okay,
thing
that's good to know.
as Twitter.
I mean,
Yep.
and that works well for celebrities, but when it comes to impersonating regular people, it's really hard sometimes to
Right.
tell who who the fakes are, right?
It's interesting. I often wonder if they should have more of a vetting process just for regular
Yeah.
users, if they want to go down that road. Um, just as another layer of, to provide privacy and
Yeah.
security,
Do you
right?
remember the like several years ago, Google? I think it was when Google Plus came out, or the Plus or
Yeah.
Google Buzz. One of them, you had to prove your identity, and you could only you had to have a first name, last name, and stuff like that, right? So they were much stricter. They relaxed that. So it seems that at least the social networks, other than Twitter anyway, and I guess Facebook a little bit for celebrities, but it's not so much a concern for them that there's a lot of potential fakes out there.
Yeah, and you've probably read about the the fact that Facebook requires you to use your real name,
Of course.
which I would argue that a lot of people get away with. I've seen some interesting names on Facebook, and I know for a fact some of my friends who are security in the hacker community are not using their real names. So, and they still have an active account. So, same thing goes for bots, right?
Rules are rules, but are they enforced?
Yeah. Right.
Good. Yeah. And just one other quick point on this story, just to sort of give a nod to ZeroFox, because it looks like they've done a lot of work in terms of categorizing and prioritizing the celebrity or the impersonators, at least on the celebrity version of their analysis. And they're using some pretty advanced tools and heuristics, I guess, to try and sift through which are sort of more parody ones, which are not necessarily bad, right? They're for any user looking at it, they're knowing they would probably know that this is just a parody or some kind of a fan page. But they've done quite a bit of work, I think, in trying to isolate the bad or high risk versions of these identities.
Yeah, they have. The other point too is they discuss kind of the bleed over into the corporate and the business world. So, celebrities is one thing, but I like the example they gave where, what if somebody was impersonating your CFO or your CEO, and you get a LinkedIn request from them? Most likely you're going to be like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'll connect with my CFO, and you may be clicking on something that will take you to a bad place.
And that almost, I could see that linking to the new kinds of attacks where you're getting fraud committed by an impersonator of an executive sending an email to another executive asking them to wire some money to a client or something, right? You could just see that happening eventually in this kind of a model as well.
Yeah, again, it's we touched upon this before in the podcast about social engineering and why it's so important that everybody's aware of these type of attacks, because they happen quite frequently.
Yep. Okay, so let's go over to the LinkedIn Pulse page and see what we can find there.
Yeah, I read this article and I was it really made me think about, how, and I'm a parent with kids, and I think about how I talk to them about social media, new technology, how it's used, what's out there, what are some of the dangers. They really almost took a look into like child psychology a little bit in terms of, talking about some different statistics around, boys versus girls and, kind of the gender issues with using social media. I thought it was fascinating. And then the article really kind of concludes with, what are some things that, parents can do. And a lot of this is, things we've talked about before with, getting involved, creating yourself a Facebook account, using the technology that your kids are using just to make yourself aware of how they're used. And then talking to your kids, right, about, here's something I saw in here. Let's have a conversation about it, and getting their opinion and getting their input. I think it's just very important that all parents.
I think so too. I think parents kind of have to get over a couple of things. One is they may not like social media in general and just don't want to have anything to do with it. But it really is important to understand sort of how it works and why things are happening the way they are when it comes to your children as well, right? And also, the kids are going to resist sometimes parents, getting on a platform just to be, because they think you're being trendy, you're trying to be cool, right? They'll say, don't even try, right? You're never going to be cool, Dad. But you have to do it just to experience that medium and understand what's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's finding those outlets with your kids, and or even looking for those opportunities of, if you see them on their phone, asking them, hey, what are you looking at? Can I check it out?
Yeah.
Or, and then just seeing their reaction of, are they trying to hide something from you, or do they, want to talk to you about it? And I think that's a good kind of litmus test, right? Of, that relationship you have with your kids of, can you share stories? Can you talk about what you're seeing and what they're seeing in social media? I think opens up that
Yeah,
communication channel.
I think that's absolutely right. And one of the things I think parents have to kind of understand and work through is rationalizing. Are they might be thinking that they're spying on their kids by poking in on or trying to view all this stuff, or they might just think that they're intruding on the kids' privacy. Or I mean, what we all want is to try and look out for their best interests. But I think we have to look at it from the point of view of these are difficult problems we all have to kind of struggle with. And it's not so much necessarily just sort of out of the blue asking your child what they're looking at or what they're reading or whatever. You could start by, if you are on Facebook or whatever, and you do have some sort of common or regular habits of viewing it, you can ask your child, I saw this on Facebook. What do you think that means, right? So you start it from your point of view rather than trying to pry into their view. And then they start to understand that you're trying to understand this stuff too.
Yeah, and I think as parents, we should probably do a better job of listening more to our kids, and instead of quickly passing judgment or wanting to pass judgment based on what they're talking about or what we see. Just being there for them and as that sounding board that they can talk to us about, concerns that they have, because they're going to be confused and they're not going to know the answers, and we may not either, right?
And they may not come out and ask. So it's
right, exactly.
It's worth putting the effort into to try and make sure you understand the issues.
Yeah, one of the things I tell my kids is, anything you post on the internet or social media or on your phone, I always just consider that public information. Yep. Even if you think you're sending a text to your friend and it's private, I always talk about, they can screenshot, the phone, and they can capture that somewhere else, and then, send. It's just one of those things that, and that's kind of eye opening to kids. Of what do you mean they can take a picture of it and put it somewhere else? And
exactly. And I do the same thing with my kids too. I try and advise them on that. And I remember, I don't know if I mentioned it on one of the earlier podcasts, but remember we covered EchoSec, right? Where you can zoom in on a map area and see what posts by Twitter and Flickr and things like that have been posted that were public and could be picked up in the feeds. And I was showing my daughter this thing and zoomed in around the area in our neighborhood. And I said, look at that. There's probably your friends here and there. And she goes, yeah, and I'm not there. You don't see me doing that. So good. Nice. Yeah, it worked out well. So
good stuff.
All right. Well, let's move on to international issues.
The international news segment on Shared Security Podcast. So, the European High Court has basically ruled that the safe harbor data sharing laws between the U.S. and the EU are basically over. It's not going to happen anymore. I am curious, Scott, does this affect Canada?
You know what?
Well?
It's hard for me to tell. I still can't tell. I have clients who are considering using, things like Microsoft 365, which is, a cloud-based version of, I guess Office 365, right? So it's a cloud-based version of Office, and when you store your documents, they're probably going to go into a server somewhere in the United States. And, they even quoted the safe harbor, provisions, and Microsoft promised they were going to put them in place. But really, first of all, if the provisions themselves, even if they are able to follow them, aren't good enough to meet the EU's Data Protection Act, which is stricter than Canada's, I think. They're very, very concerned about it. And so if they're saying, the provisions don't seem to be, protecting European citizens personal information as well as it should be. So I think we have a similar problem in Canada to try and sift through this too, and figure out what it means. And I think that companies like Microsoft, for example, may be trying to build data centers in Canada, probably in Europe too, or at least lease or whatever. But that, to me, that doesn't it's kind of what would you call it? An image or a vision of how it could be done, but it's not necessarily going to be that effective. It gives you the illusion, I guess, is what I was trying to say, of something separate and sovereign. But really, I think the things like the Patriot Act, unless the safe harbor overrides it, which I doubt it does, any company that actually has a business or headquarters in the United States could be asked to get one of their international subsidiaries' data, right? So I'm not sure that it's as good a protection as some people think it may be. So I'm actually kind of, in a way, happy to see that this is being revisited. It's not necessarily going to be good for business in general in the short term, but I think it will focus more attention on exactly how we protect people's personal information.
Yeah, and I think this all started with the Edward Snowden revelations about how the NSA is, collecting all this data, and a lot of that data is from, European countries and European citizens using U.S. based, services like Facebook and Google and other things. So, from the privacy front, I think you could, especially Europeans, can consider this a pretty big win, right? Where, my government can't spy on you.
Well, I think there's probably deeper issues to explore there. I don't think we can go into them in great detail, but I think the safe thing to say is that if the world believes that doing business with American companies is not going to be secure, or people's information won't be private, then people will stop dealing with American companies, and they'll do things from their own or from other more publicly interested organizations, right, that have an interest in doing things more privately. So it could hurt the U.S. Businesses too.
Sure. Absolutely. It gets complicated too, because I'm just thinking of, just take Facebook, for example. When you're posting and you're reading and you're sharing information with others on their systems, how do you know what server and what, cloud cluster and all these other things that your data is being stored? I mean, I see that as just a technological nightmare for companies to, okay, now we have to split our data storage and communication based on the location of somebody using our service.
What does that mean when it comes to things like Apple iOS, right? So recently they've come out and said, we can't decrypt anything for you guys as of whatever version, iOS 8, was it? They basically allow end users to encrypt their own data. It gets done automatically, but the keys are only with the client, right? So that's a good sign for consumers, I think. But it will, I think this kind of thing will probably cause more movement in that direction, which is good.
Yeah, there's definitely more to happen with this topic for sure, and I think we'll stay on top of that and see if there's any other developments. But it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's going to be going on for a long time.
Oh yeah.
So how about the Internet of Things?
It's the topic of the day.
You'd think that we would have slammed enough on it in the last 4 or 5 months that at least the people that listen to this podcast are probably more aware than the average, I guess it looks like, of some of the risks that we're dealing with, and some of them we don't even understand yet.
Yeah, but and I thought this article was interesting. So the IT security organization ISACA did a survey. They surveyed U.S. consumers and IT professionals about the Internet of Things, and I thought it was interesting. What they found was, most consumers just want the technology. They just want to buy stuff, right? So they're not really too concerned about, it's going to get hacked and my data is going to get exposed. It's more about wow, that Apple Watch is so cool right now. I've got to have it, and I don't really care either how much it costs or anything else about privacy and security issues. That's the kind of the hot thing right now. Where on the other side, we have IT and security professionals in technology that are kind of like, oh, okay, hold on a second. This stuff's moving a little too fast. There's some risks here. We're not sure about how these devices can be used safely in an enterprise environment. So for business, so it's a lot like when mobile phones really started getting popular. A couple of years ago, the whole BYOD phenomenon, right? They're bringing in these devices into the workplace, and then IT is kind of left to secure them and to manage them and to, do all that stuff. We're seeing the same thing now with, everything from the watches to even Tesla cars now that can apparently drive themselves. So in some fashion.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's really kind of sad in a way that people don't seem to either understand the risks or they don't care about them. And I think that the manufacturers or vendors are starting or have to this point really sort of relied on that. Just back to our last podcast, I think we were talking about Spotify's privacy policy, right? They came out right out and said, we want you to share your contacts with us. And that was in their privacy policy. But people don't really understand what the implications of that are, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's just a mindset, right? I was looking at kind of the results here, and smart TVs were the most common device that most people had bought. That's considered, the Internet of Things, and I know just with my smart TV, I don't even think twice about it now. Those Internet of Things features, it's always on, it's always connected to the internet. I like the features of it, but I don't often think about, wow, what are they doing with my data? And they can actually figure out what I'm watching on Netflix. In fact, I know with my TV, I have a Vizio, right? And we've talked about Vizio TVs in the past. They actually do collect that information, and you actually agree to their terms of service when you power up their TV and you buy it. It is kind of eye-opening, and it does. I think more people just need to think about that with the technology that we're using.
And I think there are two big areas people kind of need to focus on the risks. One is the insecurity of the devices and the protocols themselves, right? When you add something to your home network, what does that do to the vulnerability of your network and
right,
how the devices could be abused? The other aspect is, okay, let's suppose the device is secure. What is it collecting and sending out to some place that you don't know? And what are they doing with it, right? Which is what you just said. So it's sort of two angles you have to look at from that point of view.
Yeah, and most of these third parties that are getting your data, and it's like what we talked about before with social networks. These are ad agencies, and it's used for advertising. It's used for to sell you more stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
Sell you more things.
And to some organizations, that's their whole business model. It's not so much providing the service; it's the ads that go with it.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I'd like to definitely see, talk to maybe more, IT professionals that just have to deal with the influx of devices. I mean, just watches alone, right, into their environment. It's really challenging right now because everything is being connected to the internet.
Yeah, and I notice I've looked, I explicitly look for mention of impacts on business or how the Internet of Things is going to affect businesses in the future. And most of the time, it's from a market point of view. Like, what can you do in your business that will leverage the Internet of Things? It has nothing to do with how is the Internet of Things going to be useful in your infrastructure within the business. So
that's right.
I think there will be some impacts, but I don't see anybody talking about them yet. So if anybody hears of anything, definitely let us know.
Yeah, it's uncharted territory right now, and it will be interesting.
Yep. A couple other last minute items.
Yeah, just to mention, I don't think we'll go into too much detail with it. There was some research a couple weeks ago released about some hackers that, or I won't say researchers that were able to figure out how to control Siri and the voice control aspects of your mobile phone from about 16 feet away. The bottom line is it's not a serious risk. We shouldn't all be just turning off Siri and freaking out, right? It takes some specialized equipment to do this. You have to actually have headphones in that have the microphone feature plugged in, and you also have to have that activated on your lock screen, which a lot of people do, but there's a lot of caveats to it. It's a very hard attack to pull off, but the point of it is, researchers and hackers are always looking for ways to change the way that our phones work and to find ways to break in and manipulate things. So just another thing to be aware of.
Especially because Siri, in a sense, can be used as a way of getting commands onto the device, right? The voice commands, for example. What could you possibly do? I can't really imagine it. I just have a bad feeling that if Siri does get abused, it potentially could have some downside. I just can't imagine what the exact use cases would be that would put you at big risk at the moment.
Exactly. And I know with iPhones, the new iPhones, they are doing more type of voice authentication now, where, it's going to be harder for anybody just to pick up your phone and start doing things through a voice perspective. So, I think the technology is getting better in that way too.
So, but we'll keep an eye on this kind of vulnerability and research. It's always interesting.
Absolutely. So do you want to finish up and talk about that phishing attack?
I guess the latest, it was a study done by the University of Toronto that looked at two-factor authentication. And specifically, I think it's been observed in increasing use as a formulated model for an attack where you get a phone call from somebody about something you're interested in, perhaps, and then they say, "Oh, I'm going to send you some stuff, or I'll send you a link to our brochure or whatever it is," and it happens to be on a Google Drive. And when they send it to you, it asks you to do your two-factor authentication when you click the link, or at least that's what the expectation is. But when you do that, they're actually sitting there waiting for you to enter that code that comes from Google in your SMS message, and as soon as you enter it, they basically just do the same thing. It's definitely a man-in-the-middle type of thing. So it's just combining a social engineering phone call with the two-factor authentication and trying to find a way around that.
Yeah, definitely an interesting attack. I know when I was working in the banking industry, we saw similar types of attacks, maybe not necessarily that sophisticated, but there are ways to kind of overlay fake sites, and I've seen the one where you can they can bypass the code or the pin, out of band pin that you're putting in, because they're actually using the same session that you're using, and they basically hijack it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so they're getting, they're always going to be trying to get one step ahead of us. I think Bruce Schneier quoted at one time, it's a cat and mouse game, and in the end, the mice will win, but the cats will be well fed. So
that's a great quote. I like that.
So we're definitely going to have to keep telling people about these different kinds of social engineering vulnerabilities or attacks that people will need to be aware of.
Yeah, and one thing that we might want to talk about in a future episode is, I don't know if you see this problem at home, but I get a ton of these calls for someone from overseas calls you and says you need to patch your Microsoft Windows system immediately. Call this number for guidance. Very kind of threatening type phone calls, and what they do is they actually walk you through taking you to a fake site to put in your personal information and scam you that way. So we get calls all the time here. It's kind of out of control.
It's a scam that I've been actually telling people about for a couple of years now. Actually, I was doing a security awareness presentation at a pharmaceutical company a couple of years ago, and almost the whole company was there listening, and the CIO was at the back of the room. And as I described this, I'll call it the fake Microsoft support scam, right? Where the people call you up and tell you there's errors on your computer and we'll help you fix them. And the CIO interrupted me in the middle of it, and he says, just wanted to let everybody know this is happening to us right now, but on a business context. Basically, their overseas sales offices are getting phone calls from people saying they're from the IT department and they've seen errors on their computer and they need them to download something to fix it. And it almost worked. So if it wasn't such a small company where the people overseas knew the IT group and knew it wasn't them, you could easily be fooled by that kind of thing. So that's definitely a social engineering use case that I tell people about a lot these days.
Yeah, it's just people just need to be aware of it, and because it's happening so much, and I get people asking me all the time of, "Hey, do you get those calls?" I'm like, "Yep, I get those calls, just like you guys do."
Yep. And they're getting better at spending time doing research as well, so they'll know kind of what maybe what your environment is. All they have to do is get you to go to a website, and they can get your browser and OS information right off of the the headers.
That's it.
So once they have that, that's where a lot of them use that as a cue to call you up and ask you about your Windows 7 upgrade or whatever to Windows 10, and can we help you do that? And so yeah,
right.
It's really a mucky area, despicable people.
It is. I agree.
Well, I guess we're at the end of our discussion, but we already have some topics lined up for next week. People should feel free to send us any questions or suggestions of things they want to talk about. And we also should mention we have an important event coming up.
Which one is that?
He said, hoping. Well, we're at episode 47, and I think we're closing in on 50, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. The big episode 50. I knew what it was.
Are you gonna feel old?
I just, I'm gonna feel really old. Yes, it's our 50th episode. We've been recording the podcast since 2009. Yep. And we're looking to do something special for our 50th. So if there's anything that any of our listeners want to hear about, or any previous guests that we've had on the show, maybe we can,
or even anything you can think of that would be fun to do as a something never been done before on a podcast.
Maybe we can do like a video podcast or something.
I was going to say we could podcast naked, but then if we're going to do video, then I don't think that would work.
No one wants to see that.
No, bad idea.
But speaking of previous podcasts, we have had several requests just over the last couple of weeks for archives of our old social media security podcast over the years, and so I put together a archive feed. It's an RSS feed. You can subscribe to it just like this podcast through iTunes or through other another podcast reader. So you can now do that, and we'll have a link in the show notes. It's also linked on our blog and our site, and then also all our old show notes with each associated episode are also listed up there as well.
Absolutely. So I appreciate you doing that, Tom. It's good.
Yeah.
So I will hopefully. I think we've been doing a lot better lately at getting out at least one a month, maybe more, right? Episodes. So I'm hoping people are staying tuned, waiting with bated breath for our next episodes.
So we think.
Yeah, we can I don't know, fantasize about that. So, all right. Well, I think that'll be it for today. But I want to thank everybody for listening. And we didn't give out the contact information, but you can send us email at feedback@sharedsecurity.net, I believe.
Yep.
And we also have voicemail 613-693-0997. If you have any questions, comments, or want to report a fire anywhere. No, not anywhere, but just never mind. We'll be back probably in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, if we're lucky.
Yep.
Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.